We are 42 days away now from the 2024 election, and while rumors and misinformation swirl about undocumented immigrants casting ballots, we want to separate fact from fiction. The State Board of Election is weighing in on requirements to be a registered voter.
Sam Matheny explains this and a loophole where people could vote illegally. He joins us in the studio. Sam?
Tyler, Janice, election integrity is one of the most important and significant concerns ahead of the 2024 election after ballots and voting locations came under fire in 2020, but now there are concerns about non-citizens casting ballots. With thousands of undocumented immigrants coming in through the southern border every day, some people are concerned that they could be illegally voting.
The last thing you will want to do is go wave a red flag before a government agency and tell them where you're at and that you are here.
At Illinois DMV facilities, a new law allows undocumented immigrants to apply for a different type of driver's license without being a U.S. citizen, but they can't register to vote without a social security number. In a statement from the Secretary of State's office, a spokesperson says voter registration has not changed and do not change because of the new law. Various electronic protection measures are already in place that fully omit the voter registration process for all driver's license applicants who are not citizens. If no social security number is provided, state systems will not allow staff to launch voter registration records. But verification requirements are different when registering at a voting office or a polling place. An applicant must provide two pieces of identification, like a state ID or proof of residency, but a social security number is not required. This means it is possible for an illegal voter to go to the polls, sign a form, and lie about being a citizen, and then vote in the presidential election. All that is required at the polls is a signature saying the voter is a citizen. State Board of Election spokesperson Matt Dietrich confirmed that this is true, but says the state has never seen this happen. He says if that illegal voter seeks citizenship, Customs will find out and deport them.
Anyone who ever has any hope of entering the citizenship process, if you register to vote, you are ensuring that not only will you not go through the citizenship process, but you'll be sent out of the country.
And Dietrich adds that the risk of being deported from the U.S. is a real deterrent for anyone considering an illegal vote. Here are some other facts. No election official in the U.S. can require a voter to show documents proving citizenship at a polling place. The only time a voter could be asked to show an ID at the polls is if their ballot signature does not match the one on their registration form.